Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty leagues, PPR leagues, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss everything in the world of fantasy football. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And we're back again for another episode for you guys. We got a lot of things coming up soon here in the NFL offseason, like the draft, free agency. It's pretty much, dwindling down. But, we have some news this past week that Robert Kraft said Tom Brady can play 6 to 7 more years. Well, that's what at least that the quarterback told the owner of the Patriots. And right after that, Aaron Rodgers said he can play into his 40s. And then, Drew Brees recently said he can play till he's 45. Do you really think that's realistic that we can have 3 quarterbacks play into the 40s right now and that's in the prime? Me, I think it's very unrealistic that we can have Tom Brady play till he's 45. I give him at least 3 more years max. Drew Brees, I give him 3 more years because remember, he is turning 38. He actually just turned 38. I think Aaron Rodgers is in his mid-30s, so I can see him play for 5 more years. But, man, we're in a time where we can have quarterbacks playing at 45. What does that do for fantasy football?
Well, the thing is, what do you think they'll do? Do you think they'll be, productive quarterbacks, right? Because Drew Brees right now is still one of the best quarterbacks in the game, right? He's still, from a fantasy perspective, still one of the best in the game. Aaron Rodgers, again, and Tom Brady, also, all one of the best quarterbacks in the game. Now, do I think they'll be that at older age? No. Because you can see certain things, with Brady, he doesn't throw, the ball deep as well as he used to. There's, small things, however, that he doesn't do. Problem is, what the Patriots basically decided was okay, cool, you can't throw deep. We're not going to get Randy Moss or those guys anymore. We're going to get Gronkowski. We're going to get Aaron Hernandez. We're going to get Martellus Bennett. We're going to get tight ends that can catch the ball and do stuff like that, which helped his production, right? So that helps you basically extend your career like that, right? Someone like Drew Brees, right, he's basically been the entire offense for the Saints for over a decade now, right? He's been somebody that it didn't matter who he was throwing to. It doesn't matter if it was Colson. Didn't matter if it was Cooks. Didn't matter who was back there. He was going to get you about almost 5,000 yards, right? Because for the last 3 seasons, he's been the number 1 quarterback as far as production goes, as far as passing. And that'll probably continue for another couple of years. Can he play till he's 45? Yes. Will he be able to play well until he's 45? No, because those are 2 very different things.
Yeah, and Drew Brees is entering the final year of his contract. He signed an extension last September. So, there's a chance that Drew Brees can enter the free agent market again for a second time in his career. Because remember, San Diego let him go. And back when they were in San Diego, can you believe that?
No more San Diego.
When
now
they're in
Los Angeles.
No. So San Diego let him go.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if the Saints will let him go, but I do think that's the reason why the Saints can potentially take a rookie quarterback this year to eventually take over the starting quarterback job. But, Drew Brees, as of this year, remains one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league, especially in fantasy. I think he's easily a top 5 quarterback. Come on now. So, as of right now, the quarterbacks that I mentioned, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, probably going to be top 5 quarterbacks. So, there's no reason to panic as of now. But let's just say if these guys hit the age of 45 and they're still in the league for some reason, they're probably not going to play well. And I talked about this on the football podcast. You guys can listen to it earlier on Tuesday this week. And I talked about how Brett Favre was just dramatically terrible when he was like 41-42.
Right.
It was tough to see him play out there. It was sad.
Yeah, he fell off a cliff at the very end.
Yeah. It was, and that's tough for me to say because I love Brett Favre growing up. And watching him play his last year, he just looked really slow. It looked like he hasn't played football. Like he never in his life.
And you're right. I was going to say the one difference I would say with Brett Favre as compared to Tom Brady, Drew Brees, and Aaron Rodgers, the people that we're talking about, I would put Favre more in the class of like a Ben Roethlisberger. And what I mean by that is basically they get hit a lot all of the time. Don't get me wrong, Brees and all them get hit, but they don't ever seem to get that injury, right? Like Brady had it over a decade ago, right, when he got hit in Game 1 of the 2008 season. So I think with Brady, with Brees, with Rodgers, with people like that, they, can last longer just because that's how their game goes. They're not running around. This isn't Robert Griffin III where he's running around and just getting blasted every single time he tries to slide. The fact that they don't get hit as much does do a lot to extend their career. It does do a lot to make you think they can actually play until 45. Now, do I think Brady's playing with the Patriots until 45? No, because that's not what the Patriots do. Even with Brady, who's been the one constant over the last 20 years, they're going to get rid of him at some point as well. Like, he's not going to be totally the exception to the rule. Now, Brees might stay in New Orleans because he's New Orleans, right? Like, not since Archie Manning has there been a quarterback so valuable to a team in New Orleans that you had to keep him. Like, I don't think it's even a thing of just like, oh, if you keep him, then you don't have enough money to keep for other people. Yeah, that's fine. Like, he is such a staple and such an icon in the city of New Orleans. I don't see how they could let him go. And Aaron Rodgers, I mean, he's still one of the best in the NFL, so you got to wait to see some sort of a decline because we thought that was what it was last year, right? Remember, we thought like for a little bit that Aaron Rodgers wasn't the same quarterback, that all of a sudden, maybe he's now, a different guy. Now maybe he's someone who you can't trust as much because, he's not the same guy without his wide receiver because Jordy Nelson was hurt and everything else. I mean, dude still had basically 4,500 yards, 40 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. Like, he totally came back. And, I mean, he's not someone who can do everything by himself, but the three we mentioned, like, all of them I think can have an extended career just because of the way they play, which isn't as reckless as people like Andrew Luck or Robert Griffin III or Ben Roethlisberger or people like that.
Yeah, and, when we talk about all these quarterbacks, there's a lot to say, heading into next year, but we can't question the ability of Drew Brees, Tom Brady, and Rodgers. I do think we can question a little bit about Tony Romo. He's still part of Cowboys. There's talk that he might retire and go do the TV thing.
Right.
Yeah. And if that does happen, that's going to pretty much hurt. That's going to impact, I think, players on the Houston Texans. Definitely the Denver Broncos. I talked about this, I think, on the fantasy show last week when I was talking about the outlook of the Broncos and Texans quarterbacks. DeAndre Hopkins can easily be a top 5 fantasy receiver with Tony Romo. Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders can be top 10, top 5 fantasy receivers with Tony Romo. He might retire. So, can you really believe that Tony Romo could retire?
Yeah, but Romo's also in that kind of Ben Roethlisberger, Brett Favre thing where it's like every time he's going out, he's getting hurt. Like, it's one of those things of like, especially with Romo, he has a chance to be a broadcaster, right? Like, he has a chance to actually get money from other like avenues. And it's this thing of just like, okay, do you want to keep getting hit and possibly having more surgeries, or do you want to just kind of take this nice CBS job over here and just kind of take that and run?
Yeah, and honestly, it's actually a very big deal because, you still get really good money for doing TV and that type of aspect because they're expecting to have him replace the role of Phil Simms and CBS, and then I think Fox Sports wants to replace Tony Romo with John Lynch,
right?
Because John Lynch is
Niners GM, yeah,
the Niners GM now.
But
I would love to see Romo on TV actually.
Yeah, and we're saying all this by the way in the sense of just like, now if Aaron Rodgers starts getting hurt over the next few years, then all of a sudden you change the math with that whole thing. With Romo, yeah, that totally makes sense with him, man, because, for the last, 3 or 4 years, he hasn't been the guy, right? Like, he hasn't been what you would want him to be as a quarterback. In 2014, he had a good year, but basically ever since then, he's either been hurt, the team's been bad, or Dak Prescott's come in and it's been like, okay, cool, never mind, you're staying on the bench, Tony. Like, we understand you're probably better than him as a quarterback right now, but we're going to go with the young guy right now.
Yeah, and honestly, though, I think in Tony Romo's mind, he wants the chance to win a Super Bowl, at least compete for one.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So I do think that's the reason why he won't retire. But honestly, though, he hasn't played a full season since 2014.
Right.
He's had a lot of injuries. I wouldn't question him retiring because, we see it's just a long-term health issue too. So I wouldn't question it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And whether he comes back to the NFL or not, if he goes to the Texans or the Denver Broncos, but even though Denver Broncos said that they're not interested in bringing him in, which is a lie, they should be. I think he can be a productive fantasy quarterback for those two teams.
Right.
Yeah, and as Anthony's alarm just went off, well, we're going to take a break.
That's my bad.
All right, it's okay. But, I just want to say that I think Tony Romo he still has the ability to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback, but honestly, he may be too much of a risk if he continues to play next year as a starter.
Right.
All right, we're going to take our first break here, and when we get back, we're going to discuss Cleveland Browns. That's right, Cleveland Browns football on the Fantasy Football Show, guys. Yeah, we will discuss Corey Coleman and the potential return of Josh Gordon when we return to Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And one of the big names that could make a return this year could be Josh Gordon. And, as of right now, Josh Gordon still is suspended. He he can be reinstated, I think, next month.
Right.
I think that's the plan for Josh Gordon there. He can be reinstated in April or in May. So, if Josh Gordon does return, or is reinstated, the Browns said that, they wouldn't be shy of welcoming, of him returning back to the team. And I do think that can bode well for Cleveland, especially one of the young quarterbacks they can potentially take, or Cody Kessler if he happens to be the starter again. That can bode really well for Cleveland. And, Josh Gordon can be a guy that you might have to pretty much I wouldn't say stay away, but I would say he more of a high risk. He could be a high risk, high reward type of guy, or he can be a high risk, low reward type of guy. Either way, he can be a boom or bust player because he's just been out of the game for a while.
Right.
But if Josh Gordon does return, that means that Corey Coleman, the receiver the Browns drafted last year in the first round, can move to the slot. And I actually like that role for him. He kind of has the build of a slot receiver. He's 5'11", 185. He kind of has the build of Odell Beckham. And I think Corey Coleman, we've seen that last season, he can play on the outside.
Right.
So I do think Corey Coleman can be a success next year, no matter what happens about Josh Gordon. But honestly, though, when you're in the draft and you see Josh Gordon there, and he is reinstated, he is going to play for the Browns. I just think he's someone you have to pretty much be concerned about because we don't know if he can still play at a high level. We don't know. He is still 26, but we don't know. He just hasn't. I think he's played, 4 games in 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something you have to be concerned about.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, when someone has an injury history like that, you kind of got to monitor.
Well, it wasn't injury. It was suspension.
That's true, I guess, suspension. But when someone's not able to be on the field as much, when someone's, for whatever reason, injuries or, in his case, marijuana and stuff like that, it's the situation where, what's the saying go? Like, the best ability is availability kind of thing. Like, if you're able to be there, that's, going to help you out a lot just because you have the team, you give them confidence that you can actually do the job. And for Gordon, don't get me wrong, when he was good and he was going, one of the best, like legitimately one of the best wide receivers in the game, but he also couldn't get off the marijuana, and then all of a sudden you got suspended left and right, and now they have a new guy, Coleman, and it's just like, yeah, we kind of want to go with him. Like, we understand you're great, but you're probably going to get suspended again, and we can't necessarily throw all of our hopes on you and then get fooled again.
Yeah, and, we can't forget, Corey Coleman was injured last year too, and it kind of ruins him of having a breakout year.
Right.
I think he can have that breakout year in fantasy, but I do think with the potential return, Josh Gordon could somehow dent it. But you never know. I still think Corey Coleman, I would rate him a little higher. Mm-hmm. And, some people are going to rate Josh Gordon higher because, he has a name. But I have to go with a guy that's a little bit younger that has more potential. And I have to go with Corey Coleman in that aspect. So
right.
I think he can be more of a low-risk, high-reward type of guy instead of Josh Gordon being a high-risk, high-reward type of player. Mm-hmm. And, speaking of high-risk, high-reward, one of those players I always considered Jordan Reed, and Jay Gruden did say, he told CSN Mid-Atlantic that the offense runs through Jordan Reed. And, Jordan Reed plays a position that has been historically weak for fantasy. Jay Gruden made a comment that, after losing Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon in free agency, Jordan Reed is pretty much the guy in this offense now. Remember, Josh Doctson, who did play a valuable role last season in Washington, he's expected to get a boost in playing time. I think he's going to have a really good value in fantasy because of that. They got Terrell Pryor, but I think with Reed, it's all about him staying healthy.
Right.
And when he's healthy, he's one of the best players in the game. I think he can easily be a top 3 tight end. It's tough for me to put him there because he has had trouble to staying healthy, but he has the ability to climb that threshold. And, he has not played more than 14 games in his career, and, he played 12 last season. He can be a really great player, but honestly, with his injury history, he is a high upside, high risk player.
Right.
In fantasy.
The concussions are kind of a thing with him. They say the offense runs through him, which makes sense when you consider the fact that Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon, they're both gone, which were the focal points of the offense before. Now that they're gone, you're not necessarily going to go to Terrell Pryor as much, considering he's the one they replace him with. So Jordan Reed's someone that they trust, right? He's somebody that, quote-unquote, when healthy, when, everything's clicking, he's 1,000-yard potential tight end in this league, and you kind of then run the offense kind of like the way the Patriots do.
Yeah, and for Kirk Cousins, I think this is a huge year for him as well, because he is on a contract year,
right?
Like he is last year. He's playing with that franchise tag. He does have some viable weapons there in Terrell Pryor, Josh Doctson, and Jordan Reed. Mm-hmm. I think if I had to go with one of these guys in the receiving core, I'm going to count Jordan Reed in there because he can be a receiver. I would be more comfortable with Josh Doctson because he has played with Kirk Cousins before. Right. I wouldn't say Terrell Pryor because he is still as of right now he has one good year in him. I hope he's not a 1-year wonder, but he has potential to pretty much have a drop off. Jordan Reed, I don't want to put him there. Don't worry, I would draft him if he was there. But I'm saying if you draft Jordan Reed, you got to get a backup plan.
Yeah, you do have to get a backup plan, but I mean, name me a tight end you don't have to have a backup plan for, because Gronkowski you have to have a backup plan for. If you tight, who else would be someone like that? I mean, I guess Kelsey, maybe not. Kelsey's probably
Antonio Gates.
Antonio Gates, you have to have a backup plan if you're going to deal with Henry with that, because Gates is old at this point. Like, there's a lot of tight ends in this league where you have to have a backup plan for, or they're not good enough to where you just rely solely on them, right? A lot of tight ends have that thing, except for Travis Kelce. Like, I think he's the only one basically in the league that you don't have to have some contingency plan for. So in that aspect, I would take Jordan Reed. Like, not high. I think he's probably the third, fourth best tight end in the game. But still, if you had the chance to get him, I think you absolutely pick him up.
Yeah, and I want to talk about one more receiver. He can be kind of a deep end, a deep sleeper, I might add. That is Sammy Coates of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mike Tomlin told ESPN that he expects Sammy Coates to take another leap in 2017.
Right.
He said that he made a significant leap from year 1 to year 2. He's faced some adversity through his journey with injuries and so forth. But, with Martavis Bryant, who is another receiver that can be reinstated,
right,
I think Sammy Coates, his sleeper appeal will be lost. So with the Steelers potentially getting Martavis Bryant, that's going to hurt Sammy Coates' value. But when Martavis Bryant, if he happens to come back, what does that do for Bryant's value? Because remember, he's been out of year for 1 year. But what we've seen from Martavis Bryant has been pretty amazing when he's on the field. I expect Martavis Bryant he has potential to be a top 15 receiver, even better than that. But let's just say if he doesn't get reinstated by the NFL, which is a possibility, I think Sammy Coates can be a sleeper this year for the Pittsburgh Steelers and fantasy football.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, Bryant, he has a chance to be a 1,000-yard receiver, but he also might not be reinstated by the NFL. Coates, he's a 20-yard per catch quality kind of guy, right? Like, that's kind of his thing. He's someone who, because the Steelers are good at this. Steelers are good at developing wide receivers. Like, they're good at, taking a guy who you're not exactly, have a lot of confidence in and kind of raise his value. Like, Antonio Brown slowly went from a guy that's like, oh, yeah, he's kind of good. Oh, yeah, he had a better career. His season's getting up there. And then it's like, oh, wow, he's probably the best wide receiver we have in the game. With Sammy Coates, he's someone who, not a high sample size, right, but still 21 catches last year for 435 yards, over 20 yards a catch, and 21 out of 49. So catches about half the balls that are thrown to him, give or take. He's someone who, taking the next step, you would assume somewhere around probably 800-900 yards, something like that. Not probably in 1,200-1,300 yards because that's Antonio Brown category, but it's something in the sense of right under 1,000 yards, probably somewhere about 5 or 6 touchdowns, but a solid piece, because there's no guarantee that Bryant's going to come back and be the guy that he was.
Yeah, and don't forget about Eli Rodgers too in the Steelers. He's someone that's going to get a lot of time,
right, in
the Steelers offense. All right, well, we're going to take our second break and our last break for that matter, and we're going to talk about Mr. Ocho Ocho. That's Ty Montgomery,
right,
and what Mike McCarthy said. He can be a number 1 running back. So we'll discuss that when we return to the Goins to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to Goins to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And we're going to end the episode talking about Ty Montgomery, a.k.a. Ocho Ocho, and what Mike McCarthy thinks he can be. He can be the number 1 running back in Green Bay. Well, Mike McCarthy told ESPN that he has the ability to emerge as the team's number 1 running back in 2017. And, Ty Montgomery recently made the change to running back from receiver last season. He converted from the position. I think he has a chance to be Green Bay's top running back. He was pretty much the top running back late last year. The Packers haven't really done a whole lot to address the running back position. There is still the draft, but with Adrian Peterson on the market, LeGarrette Blount still on the market, it looks like they're not very interested in those guys. Maybe it's because they want more money than they deserve. But I kind of like Ty Montgomery as the number one back. Remember, they still got Christine Michael, who they re-signed. He can be a number one back too, potentially. But moving forward, if Ty Montgomery is the number one back, is it going to be a 3-down back? I don't know. And remember, Montgomery did play receiver. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, so there is that too. So potentially, Ty Montgomery can get a lot of touches in the games. He can. And I do think he's someone that you can target maybe late in the draft as a potential sleeper because you don't know. I think he can be a really good player in fantasy this year if he does, get a lot of time and a lot of snaps and a lot of touches as a running back for Green Bay.
So he's basically what Danny Woodhead used to be, right? Danny Woodhead was a guy who got you about 400 yards rushing and about 500-600 yards receiving. That's what Ty Montgomery was before this point. And I understand he's saying he wants to be like full running back now. That's kind of what he wants to be. He wants to be that guy now. But, it's hard, man, to transition to a running back if you've never necessarily been doing that in the NFL like full time. Like just kind of like throw yourself in like I'm going to be this guy. I think as it stands right now, if you are what Danny Woodhead was, which was a solid like fantasy player, right? Because if you can get basically around call it 1,000 to 1,200 yards of total offense every single season, that's valuable. That's something that kind of gets you that flex points, on both ends of the spectrum. Like that gets you both stuff that'll help you win leagues, right? That's the thing that basically if you have that guy can be basically the difference because, people are going to have their Adrian Peterson in his prime, their Ezekiel Elliott in their prime, the, Antonio Brown's in their prime. Fine. You're going to have that one stud or two on your team. But, like, if you have someone like Montgomery, what he could be, what Danny Woodhead used to be, what, anybody on the Patriots basically, used to be, if you can be that guy, then all of a sudden you have something that makes up the roster of a championship team, and you all of a sudden have someone in Montgomery, going back to the Packers specifically, not like a fantasy football perspective, but going back to the Packers themselves, he probably shouldn't be your lead back, right? Because I just have a hard time trusting someone who used to be a wide receiver that all of a sudden wants to be a running back. But if he can be on your team as like a literally flex player, I think that's probably the best thing for him, and then go after somebody in the draft who's your number one.
I love him as a flex player,
right.
And that's why I said you should probably take a flyer on him late in the draft. I don't think he's someone that's worthy of an early round in the draft in fantasy leagues.
Right.
But the reason why I'm a little skeptical about Tom Montgomery is that, Green Bay is probably going to add another running back to the roster. You still got Adrian Peterson there. You still got LeGarrette Blount, Jamal Charles. I don't know if those guys are going to go to Green Bay. I don't know if they're interested in growing to Green Bay. I don't know if Green Bay's interested in them. If they do happen to add Adrian Peterson, I actually like that move for both sides. Mm-hmm. But remember, there's still the NFL draft. Yeah. We talked about this on the football show earlier today. You guys can check it out later. We talked about Joe Mixon, how he's not on the draft board for Patriots. Mm-hmm. I think, Joe Mixon can be a really great guy for Green Bay. This is historically a good franchise. They have a good locker room, it seems like.
Yeah.
I think Joe Mixon can be a very strong player for Green Bay next year if they happen to draft him. But there's other running backs. You got Leonard Fournette, who's probably not going to be there when the Green Bay Packers draft. He's probably going to go in the top 10, maybe top 5.
Right.
You got Dalvin Cook, who's probably not going to be there either. So your best bets go with Christian McCaffrey, Joe Mixon, or maybe Alvin Kamara at Tennessee. And he's someone that really gets lost in the sauce here with the other running backs, Alvin Kamara, who's also a great talent. I don't think Green Bay is done adding a running back. And as of right now, Tom Montgomery is the favorite to get the starting position. But I don't think they're done adding running backs to the roster because that was the weakness of this team last year.
Yeah, no. Well, yeah, that's the thing. It was such a glaring weakness for the team, right? Because Aaron Rodgers had to do so much for the team. So when it was that much of a spotlight on, like, oh, wow, we really don't have a running back at all. Like, if we had any kind of competency, we'd be a lot better. And the fact that Aaron Rodgers kind of went out in the press conference afterwards and basically was like, hey, cool, so, running backs or just anything, we need those. Can we get those? Please, like, basically pleading at a press conference afterwards to do that. I think that helps facilitate getting this done, right? Like, you can talk about Ty Montgomery being your guy, but if you have a chance to get one of the running backs, that's what you do because they, don't generally go after running backs. I don't see them taking LeGarrette Blount because I think that'd be too expensive, and that's not generally what they do. They tend to take older players at a discounted rate, a la what Julius Peppers was before that. I think what they'd end up doing basically is taking somebody in the draft, whether it's one of the people we talk about all the time, whether it's Cook, Fournette, whoever. They take one of them, and then they kind of hope for the best as far as like him being the guy that basically can like stabilize the entire offense.
Yeah, so it remains to be seen what Green Bay is done or what they would do with the running back position.
Right.
But that's going to conclude our show. You guys come back on Tuesday. I will talk about any type of fantasy football news that happens over the weekend. Anthony will be back next week.
Yep, I'll be back on Friday.
Yes, as always. And you can follow the show on a variety of platforms, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and on the website, GSMCpodcast.com. You can also follow the show on multiple social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The Twitter and Instagram handle is at GSMC_FFootball. And the Facebook page, you can like the Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And thank you guys for tuning in. See you guys next week.